The world of the deep Pleistocene was not merely a landscape, it was a living, breathing titan of ice and stone, a tapestry woven from the long shadows of jagged peaks and the relentless, scouring breath of the northern winds. We begin our journey in the Altai Mountains, a place where geography transcends the physical to become a cathedral of bone and granite, a sacred threshold where the sky meets the earth in a cold, eternal embrace. To stand here, in the mind's eye, is to step back into a time before the concept of years, before the invention of names, when the wind carried only the sharp, metallic scent of encroaching frost, and the distant, haunting cry of the cave lion echoing through the limestone canyons. Here, the air does not merely exist. It is thin, precious, and sharp as a flint blade, and the silence is so profound, so heavy, that it feels like a physical weight pressing against the chest of any creature brave enough to draw breath. For hundreds of thousands of years, this rugged frontier served as the absolute edge of the known world, a fortress of ice and permafrost that guarded a secret buried deep within the strata of time, a secret not written in stone, but in the very marrow of a forgotten lineage. The sun, in these high latitudes, was often nothing more than a pale, ghostly disk suspended in a gray expanse, offering a dim, watery light that illuminated the world without ever truly warming it. It cast long, distorted shadows across the valley floors, stretching the silhouettes of the stunted larch trees into grotesque fingers that seemed to claw at the retreating glaciers. In this cathedral of silence, a lineage of humanity lived, breathed, and dreamed. A people whose faces we can only imagine through the flickering light of a campfire, whose voices have been swallowed by the slow, grinding advance of the ice sheets, and whose history was, until recently, a void in the grand narrative of our species. These were the masters of the high places, the inheritors of the cold, existing in a realm where survival was never a mere choice, but a rhythmic, desperate dance with the elements. We stand now at the threshold of their world, peering through the silver veil of the Altai, trying to catch a glimpse of the Denisovans. To understand them, we must first understand the cradle that shaped them. The Altai is a convergence, a crossroads where the Siberian taiga meets the Kazakh steppes and the Mongolian deserts. But in the deep past, it was a barricade. As the earth wobbled on its axis and the great glaciations descended, the world transformed. The forests retreated, replaced by the mammoth steppe, a vast, golden sea of hardy grasses that supported the titans of the Ice Age. Imagine a lone figure standing on a limestone ridge overlooking the Denisova Valley 50,000 years ago. The figure is robust, built with a skeletal density that speaks of a life defined by physical labor and the constant resistance of the cold. Their skin is weathered, mapped by the harsh, ultraviolet light of the high altitudes and the biting sting of the wind-blown loess. This is not a stranger. This is a cousin. Their eyes, perhaps darker and more deep-set than our own, scan the horizon for the movement of the great herds, the woolly rhinoceros, the steppe bison, and the majestic mammoth. Every breath they take is a testament to a biological miracle. At this altitude, the oxygen is sparse, a scarcity that would leave a modern traveler gasping, their heart racing to keep pace with the demands of their blood. But for this inhabitant of the Altai, the breath is steady. Deep within their cells, a silent adaptation is at work, a legacy of a mutation, a fortunate error in the genetic code, that allows their blood to remain fluid and efficient where ours would thicken and fail. This adaptation was the EPAS1 gene, a silent witness to the Denisovan struggle. It was a character in their story, a guardian of their physiology that allowed them to colonize the roof of the world. We must view this trait not as a dry biological fact, but as a survival weapon forged in the furnace of the Pleistocene. It was the difference between a child thriving in the mountain air and a lineage flickering out in the frost. As we watch this lone ancestor, we see them reach for a piece of worked stone, a tool not of simple flint, but of beautiful green chlorite, polished to a mirror sheen. This detail, unearthed in the dark recesses of the Denisova Cave, tells us that these were not mere brutes struggling against the dark. They were artists. They possessed a sense of beauty, a desire to impose symmetry and grace upon the rugged materials of their world. The green stone, glowing in the dim light of the cave, reflects a mind that wondered, a soul that sought to capture the colors of the earth and wear them as a badge of identity. The environment of the Altai demanded a specific kind of intelligence, a spatial and temporal mastery. To live here was to know the precise moment the mountain passes would become impassable, to understand the migration patterns of animals that moved like ghosts through the mist, and to find warmth in a world that seemed determined to extinguish it. The Denisovan home was often the cave, a natural limestone cathedral that offered sanctuary from the predatory winds. Inside, the smell of wood smoke would have been a constant companion, a warm, acrid perfume that signaled safety and community. The floor of the cave was a palimpsest of generations, discarded bones, charcoal from ancient hearths, and the tiny microscopic signatures of DNA shed from skin and hair. As the night deepened in the Altai, the family would huddle together, their bodies providing a collective heat that the stone walls could not. In the flickering orange light, the shadows of the Denisovans would dance upon the cave walls, mingling with the shadows of the ancestors who had sat in that same spot 10,000 years prior. This was the continuity of the deep past. They were a people of the long present, their lives governed by the slow cycles of the moon and the agonizingly slow shift of the glaciers. They did not know they were a ghost species. They did not know that in the distant future, their entire existence would be reconstructed from a single fragment of a finger bone. To them, they were the center of the universe, the only people who truly knew the language of the mountains. The Altai was also a place of profound vulnerability. To break a limb was a death sentence. To fail in the hunt was to invite the slow, numbing embrace of starvation. The cost of their adaptation was a narrow specialization. They were the masters of the cold, but the world was changing. Beyond the silver veil of the Altai, other humans were moving. To the west, the Neanderthals, stout, powerful, and weathered, held the forests of Europe. To the south, in the warmth of the African sun, our own direct ancestors were beginning to stir, their minds igniting with the fires of symbolic thought and complex language. The Denisovans stood in the middle, a bridge between the old world and the new, a lineage that had taken the high road into the east and found a way to survive where others saw only a wasteland. The biography of the Denisovan body is one of resilience. Their teeth, much larger and more complex than our own, suggest a diet that required powerful mastication, perhaps the tough roots of the steppe or the frozen marrow of the megafauna. These teeth were the grinders of history, the tools that allowed them to extract life from the most stubborn of sources. When we look at the few physical remains we have, we see a skeleton that was built for endurance. They were the long-distance runners of the high plateaus, their joints and tendons reinforced by the constant climbing and the heavy loads of the hunt. But it is the silent code that truly tells their story. In the silence of the genome, we find the traces of their encounters with other kinds of humans. The Altai was not a prison, it was a meeting ground. At certain intervals, perhaps during the brief golden interglacial periods when the ice retreated and the valleys bloomed with wildflowers, different groups of humans would find each other. Imagine a Neanderthal woman wandering far from her kin, encountering a Denisovan hunter near a mountain stream. There would be no words, only the cautious sensory evaluation of the other. In those moments, the genetic streams of humanity, which had diverged hundreds of thousands of years earlier, would occasionally fold back together. These meetings were the accidents that rewrote our destiny. They were not just biological exchanges, they were the first inklings of a global human identity, a recognition that despite the different shapes of their brows or the thickness of their limbs, they shared the same fire, the same fear of the dark, and the same drive to protect the next generation. One such meeting is etched into the very soil of the Denisova Cave. Archaeologists found the remains of a young girl nicknamed Deni, who lived some 90,000 years ago. When her tiny bone fragment was analyzed, the results were staggering, a cinematic revelation that echoed through the halls of science. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. She was the living bridge, the physical manifestation of the silver veil being drawn aside. Her existence tells us that the Altai was a place of union. In her, the two great lineages of Eurasia were one. She would have grown up in a world where these differences were likely accepted as part of the natural variation of the human family. She would have learned the tracking skills of her father and the fire-making techniques of her mother, a hybrid child of the Ice Age, her very blood a testament to the fluid boundaries of our origins. But as the eons pressed on, the climate of the Altai grew even more volatile. The last glacial maximum began to tighten its grip on the planet. The silver veil turned into a shroud of white. The Denisovans, for all their mastery, began to fade from the archaeological record. Perhaps the herds they followed moved too far into the lowlands, or perhaps they were slowly absorbed by the rising tide of Homo sapiens moving up from the south. This transition was not a sudden war, but a slow, poetic vanishing, a whispered extinction. They did not leave behind fields of battle, but a legacy of breath. As the sun sets on the Altai in our narrative, we must realize that the mystery of the Denisovans is also the mystery of ourselves. We are the survivors who carry their ghost. The silver veil is not just a geographical barrier in the mountains. It is the thin line between being forgotten and being remembered. Every time a person in the high Himalayas draws a deep, easy breath in the thin air, a piece of the Altai lives again. Every time we look into the genetic mirror and see the segments of DNA that do not match our own African roots, we are seeing the shadow of the hunter on the ridge, the artist with the green stone, and the child of the two lineages. The Altai Mountains remain today, their peaks still jagged, their winds still nameless. The cave still sits in the limestone cliff, a hollow eye watching the passage of time. But the secret is no longer buried. It has been exhaled into the modern world. The Denisovans were the silent architects of our survival in the East, the pioneers who faced the biting cold and the thin air so that their descendants, us, could one day inherit the earth. Their story is a reminder that we are a mosaic, a collection of ancient memories carved in bone and written in the code of life. As the cinematic camera of our mind pans back from the Altai, leaving the peaks to the silence and the snow, we take with us the warmth of their fires and the resilience of their spirits, forever woven into the silver veil of our shared human history. Beneath the heavy pressing silence of the Altai Mountains, where the stone itself seems to breathe with the weight of uncounted millennia, there lies a sanctuary of shadows known as Denisova Cave. It is a place where time does not flow but pools in deep, cool basins of dust and limestone. For tens of thousands of years, this cavern sat as an empty throne, a hollow cathedral of the earth that watched the world above transform from a kingdom of ice into a realm of green, and back again. The winds of the Pleistocene would howl past its entrance, carrying the scent of mammoth musk and the iron tang of oncoming blizzards. But within the cave's mouth, the air remained still, a stagnant, protective embrace that cradled the debris of existence. It was here, amidst the discarded remnants of ancient meals and the soot of fires long since gone cold, that a small fragment of history waited in the dark. It was not a majestic skull or a formidable femur, but a tiny sliver of a finger bone, a distal phalanx no larger than a pebble, belonging to a young girl whose name has been erased by the tides of deep time. This bone was a silent sentinel, a minuscule anchor holding a vast and forgotten ship of human experience to the shore of the present. While the world above ground was rewritten 1,000 times, while glaciers retreated like defeated armies and the first cities of Mesopotamia rose from the sand, this fragment remained in a state of suspended animation. It was cradled by the cold, indifferent minerals of the cave floor, slowly enveloped by the rhythmic geological drip of lime-rich water. This was the patient chemistry of the earth, a slow-motion burial that preserved the organic architecture of the bone while the world forgot the people to whom it belonged. For eons, it lay undisturbed, a secret kept by the strata of the Paleolithic. It was a witness to the passing of ice ages, seeing through its own stillness the arrival and departure of various tenants, the hyena, the cave bear, and eventually the different tribes of man who sought refuge from the biting Siberian night. When the fragment was finally exhaled from the earth into the hands of modern science, it arrived not as a relic of a known past, but as a challenge to our very identity. At first glance, it appeared insignificant, a mere dot of calcium in the grand mosaic of archaeology. But as the researchers began to peer into its molecular heart, the bone began to speak. It did not speak in a language of words, or even in the familiar morphological dialect of skeletal anatomy. It spoke in a language of sequences, the rhythmic repeating code of adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. This was the whisper in the genetic mist, a message transmitted across 50,000 years of silence. As the code was unspooled, it revealed a subtle but profound shift in the blueprint of life, a series of mutations and variations that defied everything we thought we knew about our own reflection in the mirror of the past. Before this discovery, our map of the human story was a simpler, more lonely affair. We knew of ourselves, Homo sapiens, the wanderers from Africa who had inherited the light of the sun. We knew of the Neanderthals, our rugged, heavy-browed cousins who had endured the brutal winters of Europe. But as the geneticist's light illuminated the interior of that tiny fingerbone, a third figure began to materialize from the shadows. This was not a Neanderthal. This was not one of us. It was a ghost, a third player in the epic drama of human emergence, stepping forward from the genetic mist like a phantom ship appearing on a fog-bound sea. The realization was as haunting as it was revolutionary. For most of our history, we were not alone. The world was a more crowded, more complex, and more vibrant place, inhabited by a sister lineage that had carved its own distinct path through the high, frozen wastes of the East, while we were still perfecting the art of the hunt in the southern heat. Consider the biography of this bone and the girl it once belonged to. This trait, the very structure of her hand, was a character with its own history of struggle and adaptation. Her finger was a tool of survival, an instrument that had perhaps gripped the rough hide of a reindeer or felt the warmth of a mother's palm. In the cold of the Altai, the hand is a precious, vulnerable thing. It must remain nimble enough to nap the edge of a flint blade, yet hardy enough to withstand the creeping numbness of sub-zero temperatures. Evolution had gifted her people with a skeletal density and a physiological resilience that allowed them to thrive in an environment that would break a modern human within days. This was the duality of their existence, a biology perfectly tuned to the extreme, yet specialized to a point of precariousness. Every adaptation was a triumph, but every triumph carried a cost a commitment to a specific landscape that would eventually become their tomb. As we look closer at this silent error in the code of life, we begin to see the specific night where such a destiny might have been forged. Picture a small band of these ancestors, hundreds of thousands of years before the girl lived. They are moving through the vast open corridor of the inner Asian mountain fringe. The air is crystalline, so cold it cracks the very stones beneath their feet. In this group, a child is born with a slight variation in their genetic sequence, a mutation that alters the way their body processes oxygen or regulates heat. In the lush valleys of the south, such a change might have been neutral or even a hindrance. But here, in the shadow of the peaks, it is a fortunate accident. It is the spark that allows this lineage to push further into the thin air, to claim the high plateaus that others find uninhabitable. Over generations, this mutation is refined and reinforced, becoming the defining characteristic of a new kind of human. This genome had drifted apart from ours hundreds of millennia ago, embarking on a long, solitary journey into the heart of Asia. While our ancestors were navigating the changing seasons of the Great Rift Valley, these people, the Denisovans, were becoming the masters of the tundra and the taiga. They were learning the secrets of the mammoth steppe, a world of golden grass that stretched to the horizon, supporting a biomass of megafauna that we can scarcely imagine today. Their biography is written in the lack of oxygen, in the glare of the snow-blind sun, and in the necessity of extreme cooperation. Their hands were not just for grasping, they were the tools of a communal survival, used to stitch the thick furs that acted as a second skin and to maintain the fires that were the only thing standing between life and a frozen, eternal sleep. The discovery of the Denisovan genome forced us to rethink the very nature of what it means to be human. We had long viewed evolution as a clean, ascending ladder, with ourselves at the pinnacle. But the whisper from the cave told a different story, a story of a tangled, braided river of life. The Denisovans were not a primitive precursor. They were a sophisticated, parallel version of the human experience. Their genetic code showed that they had interbred not only with Neanderthals, but also with an even more ancient, unknown lineage, a super-archaic ghost that lived within their own DNA. This reveals a world of constant movement and interaction, a prehistoric Eurasia where different human groups met, traded, and shared the most intimate of gifts, their biology. The tiny finger bone became a vessel for this entire lost world, a microscopic library containing the records of unions and migrations that occurred long before the first word was ever written. Imagine the sensory world of that Denisovan girl. To her, the cave was not a site of archaeological interest, but a place of safety and sound. She would have known the texture of the lime wash on the walls, the specific way the smoke curled toward the ceiling, and the rhythm of the dripping water that marked the passage of the seasons. Her world was defined by the crunch of frozen earth under her feet and the smell of wood smoke that clung to her clothing. She was a part of a lineage that had survived for hundreds of thousands of years, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of the most daunting environmental challenges. And yet, she died young, leaving behind only that tiny sliver of herself to be found by a future she could never have envisioned. The ghost of the Denisovan is a character of immense significance in our own biography. When we sequenced that bone, we didn't just find a new species, we found a piece of ourselves. The genetic mist began to clear, revealing that modern humans living today in Southeast Asia, Oceania, and the Tibetan Plateau carry significant portions of Denisovan DNA. We are the phantom ship that continues to sail. The traits they developed, the ability to live in high altitudes, the immune responses that protected them from ancient forest pathogens, are now our traits. The mutation that was an accident in the Altai 50,000 years ago is the reason a Tibetan farmer can breathe easily at 15,000 feet today. The Denisovans did not truly go extinct. They were folded into the rising tide of our own species, their hard-won adaptations becoming a permanent part of the human mosaic. The transition from the discovery of the bone to the realization of our shared heritage is a journey from the cold dark of a cave to the bright light of understanding. It is a story of how a mistake in the code of life can become a survival weapon for millions. As the ice of the Pleistocene finally began to retreat, the world of the Denisovans changed. The mammoth steppe vanished, replaced by dense forests and rising seas. The environment that had demanded their specific biology was disappearing. But deep within the marrow of the survivors, the trait remained. Generations faded into dust, the Altai Mountains remained silent, and the silver veil stayed drawn for millennia. But the code was patient. It waited in the blood of the people who moved south, who crossed the oceans, and who eventually built the world we know today. We must treat this genetic inheritance as a sacred gift, a memory carved in the very substance of our being. The Denisovan girl's finger bone is no longer just a fragment of calcium. It is a key that has unlocked a hidden room in the house of humanity. It tells us that our story is not one of isolation, but of profound connection. We are the inheritors of the cold, the children of the ghost, and the bearers of a prehistoric legacy that continues to beat in our hearts and breathe in our lungs. The whisper in the genetic mist has become a roar, reminding us that we are the product of countless lives, countless struggles, and countless accidents that were, in fact, the very blueprints of our destiny. As we sit in the quiet of the modern night, far removed from the cave lions and the glaciers of the Altai, we can still feel the weight of that silence. The Denisova Cave still stands, its mouth a dark shadow against the mountain, still cradling the dust of the ages. But the secret is out. The ghost has been named. We have peered through the silver veil and found not a stranger, but a long-lost part of our own family. The tiny bone has done its job. It has anchored us to a past we almost forgot, ensuring that the masters of the high places will never truly be swallowed by the grinding of the glaciers or the fading of memory. Their biography is our biography. Their survival is our survival. In the silence of the genome, the whisper continues, a steady rhythmic pulse that connects us to the first mutation, the first fire, and the first time a human hand reached out in the dark to find another. The golden light of the Pleistocene sun once fell upon a world that knew no borders, only the rhythmic pulse of the seasons and the vast, undulating stretches of the African savanna. Here, in the cradle of all that we are, the air was thick with the scent of sun-baked grass and the musk of 1,000,000 grazing beasts. It was a time of unity, a singular moment in the deep biography of our species where the common vine of humanity grew as one. Picture, if you will, a single people standing on the edge of a great rift, sharing a single fire and looking out toward a single unbroken horizon. Their shadows, long and lean, mingled on the red earth. The ancestors of every human who would ever walk the earth, breathe the mountain air, or sail the wine-dark seas. But the earth is a restless mother, her temperament shifting with the slow wobble of the planet's axis and the cooling of the great oceans. As the lush greens of the interior began to fade into the brittle yellows of drought, a great restlessness took hold of the human spirit. It was the moment of the great parting, a partition not just of geography, but of the very soul of our lineage. In this ancient twilight of our common history, a group of wanderers turned their backs on the familiar warmth of the African heat. They were the pioneers of the deep past, driven by a hunger that was perhaps less about the stomach and more about the curiosity of what lay beyond the shimmering heat haze of the northern horizon. We must see this movement not as a hurried exodus, but as a slow generational drift, a 1,000-year walk toward the rising sun. They crossed the threshold of the Levant, leaving behind the ancestral rhythm of the Great Rift Valley and entering the vast, unknown expanses of Eurasia. As they moved, the world began to change its face. The scorching sun was replaced by a softer, more fickle light, and the towering acacia trees gave way to the gnarled oaks and the vast, whispering grasslands of the steppe. This was the first great divergence, the splitting of the vine where one branch remained in the warmth of the cradle, while the other, the ancestors of the Neanderthals and their mysterious eastern cousins, ventured into the heart of a continent that would demand a new kind of human. As the distance between these groups grew, measured in the weary footsteps of 1,000 lifetimes, a silent transformation began to take place within the very marrow of their bones. To understand this partition, we must look at the genetic clock, that invisible metronome ticking within every cell. In the silence of the genome, the rates of change began to drift. Those who stayed in the south remained tuned to the frequencies of the sun and the monsoon, their biology a character shaped by the need to shed heat and outrun the predators of the plains. But for the wanderers, the clock began to tick to the rhythm of different stars and different dangers. As they pushed further into the interior of Eurasia, the climate became a sculptor, chilling the air and thinning the oxygen, demanding a fundamental rewriting of the human blueprint. The Great Partition was no longer just a matter of miles. It was becoming a matter of essence. Imagine a night on the edge of the Caspian Sea, 100,000 years after the parting. A small band of these northern pioneers huddles around a fire, the smoke rising to meet a sky filled with constellations their African ancestors would never have recognized. Among them is a mother, her body shorter and more robust than the lean figures of the south. Her chest is broad, a barrel of bone designed to house larger lungs, for the air she breathes is growing colder and more demanding. This physical trait, the rib cage, is a silent witness to the partition. It is a survival weapon, a biological shield against the encroaching frost. But it carries a cost. The energy required to maintain such a sturdy frame is immense, demanding a constant hunt, a relentless pursuit of the high-fat marrow and the heavy muscle of the northern megafauna. The duality of her existence is etched into her very skeleton. She is stronger, more resilient to the cold, but she is tethered to a world of scarcity and extreme physical toll. As the centuries bled into millennia, this northern branch split once more. One group turned toward the setting sun, finding their home in the damp, limestone-rich forests of Europe, eventually becoming the Neanderthals we know from the caves of France and the valleys of Germany. But the other group, the ghost lineage, turned toward the east. They moved into the vast, lonely heart of the Asian interior, toward the Altai and the high, wind-swept plateaus that touched the ceiling of the world. These were the proto-Denisovans, a people who embraced the solitude of the deep continent. The further they moved from their cousins, the more the genetic mist thickened around them. They were carving a path through the frozen wastes, a journey that would lead to a long, slow transformation of their very being. They were becoming a people of the high places, shaped by the silence of the mountains and the unique chemistry of the thinning air. The solitude of the great Asian interior was a powerful evolutionary pressure. In the vastness of Siberia and the Tibetan heights, these people were isolated by geography and by the sheer brutality of the landscape. This isolation acted as a crucible. When we think of the Denisovan, we must think of the biography of the lung. As they ascended into the high altitudes, the very air became a predator. In our own bodies, thin air triggers a desperate response. The blood thickens with extra red cells to catch what little oxygen remains. But thick blood is a danger. It strains the heart and risks the life of both mother and unborn child. In the Denisovan lineage, an ancient accident, a silent error in the code of life, offered a different way. A mutation occurred in a gene that regulates how the body senses oxygen. Instead of thickening the blood, this new code allowed the heart to beat steadily and the blood to flow smoothly, even when the air was a mere ghost of itself. Think of the first ancestor to carry this gift. Perhaps it was a young man, a hunter in the Altai, who found that he did not gasp for breath as he chased the mountain sheep up the jagged scree. While his companions felt the pounding of their hearts against their ribs like trapped birds, he felt a strange, quiet calm. He did not know that a fortunate mistake in his DNA had rewritten his destiny. Because he could hunt longer, because he could survive the heights where the predators could not follow, he lived to pass that sliver of code to his children. This was the great partition of the soul in a biological sense, the moment when the Denisovan identity was forged not just by where they walked, but by how they breathed. They were no longer the same people who had stood on the African savanna. They had become something new, something specifically tuned to the silence and the cold of the High East. The sensory world of these Eastern pioneers was one of sharp contrasts. Imagine the texture of the first flint tools they napped from the dark stones of the Altai, tools that felt different in the hand than the sun-warmed rocks of the Great Rift. The smell of their fires was different, fed by the resinous wood of the larch and the dried dung of the steppe bison. The fear of the dark was amplified by the vastness of the northern night, where the aurora borealis danced in haunting curtains of green and violet, a celestial fire that their ancestors in the south had never dreamed of. In this environment, the Denisovan body became a masterpiece of adaptation. Their teeth grew larger, their enamel thicker, to grind through the tough, gritty flora of the cold-adapted plants. Every physical trait was a character in a story of endurance, a memory of 1,000 winters carved into the very architecture of the face. And as the ice retreated and advanced in its rhythmic, glacial heartbeat, the Denisovans remained, a phantom ship navigating the frozen seas of the interior. They were the masters of a world that was, for the most part, empty of other humans. This solitude shaped their culture and their spirit. They were the inheritors of the cold, a people who saw the world through the silver veil of the mountain mist. They were distinct, separate, and yet they carried within them the echo of that original fire in Africa. The partition was deep, but it was not absolute. The vine had split, but the roots were the same. As we look back at this moment of divergence, we see the beginning of a grand experiment in what it means to be human, an experiment that would eventually lead to the meeting of the streams and the weaving of the Denisovan ghost into the very fabric of our modern lives. In the deep, crystalline silence of the Pleistocene, there existed a world that did not merely challenge the living, but sought to hollow them out from the inside. We find ourselves transported to the formidable spine of the world, the Himalayan foothills and the jagged, wind-scoured heights of the Altai. Here, the landscape is a masterpiece of vertical desolation, a place where the earth rises up in a desperate attempt to touch the stars, leaving the thick, comforting blankets of the atmosphere far below. The air in these high reaches is a different substance entirely. It is thin, biting, and elusive, a ghostly vapor that lacks the heavy, life-giving density of the plains. For a traveler from the lowlands, this air is a thief, stealing the strength from the limbs and the clarity from the mind. But for those who would become the Denisovans, this harsh environment was not an enemy to be conquered, but a sculptor working upon the soft, yielding clay of their biology. To understand the alchemy that took place here, we must look at the body as a sacred vessel, a furnace that requires a constant, steady intake of oxygen to fuel the invisible fires of the cells. In the lower world, where the air is rich, the heart beats with a relaxed, confident rhythm. But as the ancestors of the Denisovans began their slow, generational ascent into the clouds, the rules of existence were rewritten. Imagine a small band of wanderers, thousands of years after the great parting from their African kin, navigating a narrow mountain pass as the sun dips below the horizon, turning the snow into a river of liquid violet. Each step upward is an ordeal. The lungs, those delicate pink sponges of the chest, expand to their limit, seeking a sustenance that is simply not there. The heart, sensing the depletion, begins to race, a frantic drummer beating a tattoo of survival against the cage of the ribs. In a modern human, this struggle against the thinning air triggers a desperate, clumsy biological response. The body, fearing suffocation, begins to flood the bloodstream with red cells, thickening the fluid in an attempt to capture every stray molecule of oxygen. But there is a profound cost to this adaptation. The blood, once a swift and nimble river, becomes a sluggish sludge, viscous, heavy, and difficult to pump. It strains the heart, wears down the vessels, and, most tragically, endangers the life of the unborn, as the thickened blood struggles to pass through the delicate architecture of the placenta. This is the vulnerability of the lowland body, a survival mechanism that eventually becomes a cage. But in the silence of the Denisovan genome, a different kind of miracle was unfolding. It was a fortunate mistake, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the code of life, a mutation in a segment of DNA known to us now as the EPAS1 gene. This was the alchemy of the high altitudes. It did not happen in a single night of revelation, but perhaps it began with a single child, born in a cave sheltered from the scouring Himalayan winds. While others of his tribe felt the heavy thumping pressure in their chests as they climbed to track the mountain goats. This child moved with a quiet, efficient grace. Inside his body, the EPAS1 gene, the super athlete gene of the prehistoric world, was performing a silent revolution. Instead of allowing the blood to thicken into a dangerous mire, this mutation acted as a biological shield. It signaled the body to use what little oxygen it had with a masterful surgical precision. It was as if his blood had learned to carry the breath of the peaks without the weight of the mountain. Think of the experience of a Denisovan hunter, high on a ridge where the sky is a deep, bruised indigo even at midday. He is a master of the vertical world. Beneath his feet, the shale is loose and treacherous, and the cold is a physical presence that bites through his layers of stitched hide. He is pursuing a snow leopard, a creature of pure muscle and shadow. In this moment, the hunter's body is a character in a drama of deep time. His lungs have learned the rhythm of the peaks. They do not gasp, but draw in the thin air with a steady, practiced calm. His heart beats with the slow, enduring pulse of the stone itself. He does not feel the lightheadedness or the nausea that haunts those from the valleys. He is at home in the realm of the clouds because his biology has become a part of the landscape. The adaptation was not a tool he could set down, nor a weapon he could sharpen. It was a signature written in his very essence, a transformation of his most basic chemistry. This biological grace allowed the Denisovans to claim a territory that was, for hundreds of millennia, a sanctuary of solitude. While the Neanderthals were locked in a struggle with the shifting forests of the West, and our own ancestors were navigating the mercurial rains of the South, the Denisovans were the lords of the High East. They inhabited the Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world, a place so high and so vast it feels like the edge of the planet. Here, the environment was the primary architect of their culture and their form. The cost of this adaptation was a specialization that tied them to the heights, but the survival advantage was absolute. They could survive and thrive where no other human could follow. We must imagine the sensory world of a Denisovan winter in these altitudes. The smell of the air is sterile, stripped of the sense of decay and growth by the absolute cold. The only sounds are the whistling of the wind through the limestone crags and the occasional thunderous crack of a glacier shifting in the distance. In the center of this desolation, the warmth of the first fire is not just a comfort, it is a sacred tether to life. The Denisovans would huddle around the hearth, their broad chests and robust frames silhouetted against the cave walls. They were a people shaped by the necessity of heat and the scarcity of breath. Their skin, perhaps darkened by the intense ultraviolet light of the high sun, was a map of their endurance. As we peer through the layers of time, we see that this EPAS1 mutation was an ancient accident that rewrote the destiny of an entire lineage. It was a mistake in the copying of the genetic script, a tiny hiccup in the molecular machinery that, in any other environment, might have been lost to the winds of history. But in the Altai, it was the key to a kingdom. It allowed the Denisovans to exist in a state of physiological peace with the mountains. They did not struggle against the thinning air because they were no longer outsiders. They had been refined by the very atmosphere that sought to exclude them. But the story of this alchemy does not end with the Denisovans. It is a legacy that was destined to be passed forward, a gift from the harsh mistress of the mountain range to the future of humanity. When the ancestors of modern Tibetans moved into these same high reaches thousands of years later, they encountered the descendants of those who carried the Denisovan ghost. Through the meeting of these two streams, the EPAS1 gene was woven into the modern human tapestry. It is a chillingly beautiful thought. The very gene that allows a modern climber to stand on the summit of Everest without the aid of supplemental oxygen is a relic of a Denisovan breath taken 50,000 years ago. It is a biological memory, a piece of the high-altitude alchemy that survived the extinction of its original creators. And as the eons rolled on, the ice retreated, and the great mammoths faded into legend, the trait remained. It stayed hidden in the marrow, a dormant potential waiting for the environment to call it forth once again. Generations faded into dust, their voices lost to the grinding of the glaciers, yet the signature of the mountain remained written in the blood. The Denisovans were the pioneers of the impossible, the first to master the alchemy of the air. They were the people who learned to live where the earth ends and the sky begins, and they left behind a biological treasure that continues to beat in the hearts of those who call the high places home. As we leave the freezing heights of the Altai and the Himalayas, we carry with us a new understanding of the human body. It is not a static object, but a living record of every challenge our ancestors faced. The Denisovan lung, the Denisovan heart, and the Denisovan blood are not just relics of a lost species. They are characters in our own biography, reminding us that we are the children of the mountain and the mist. We are the inheritors of an ancient struggle, and every breath we take in the thin, cold air is a tribute to the alchemy that saved a ghost and shaped a future. The concept of time is often sold to us as a relentless arrow, a straight and unwavering line piercing through the heart of the void. But in the deep, velvet silence of the Pleistocene, time was something more fluid. A river that meanders, folds back upon its own ripples, and creates deep, swirling eddies where the past and the future reside in a single moment. As the great cycles of the earth turned and the constellations shifted their positions in the high Siberian sky, the world prepared for a collision of histories. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Denisovans had been the undisputed masters of the eastern twilight, their bodies honed by the grinding glaciers and the thinning air of the high plateaus. They were the ancient ghosts, a lineage that had found a rugged peace in the solitude of the Altai and the vast golden stretches of the Mammoth Steppe. But far to the south, beneath the relentless and familiar heat of the African sun, another story was reaching its boiling point. The descendants of those who had stayed in the cradle, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, were beginning their own great migration, spreading out across the continents like a slow-moving tide of curiosity and desperation. Imagine the world as it was then, a planet of immense echoing distances and terrifying beauty. The modern wanderers moved with a different rhythm, their minds alight with a new kind of symbolic fire, their tools increasingly delicate, their languages beginning to complexify into the first tapestries of human thought. They crossed the land bridges and followed the coastlines, their feet treading upon soil that had not felt the weight of their specific kin for nearly 500,000 years. As they pushed into the lush, humid forests of Southeast Asia and moved toward the jagged foothills of the great mountains, they were not entering an empty world. They were entering a world already haunted by the presence of the others. And it was here, under the emerald canopy of a prehistoric wood, or in the long, cooling shadows of the mountain valleys, that the two streams of humanity finally met. This meeting was the Great Weaving, a moment of biological alchemy that would rewrite the destiny of every human being living today. We must view this encounter not as a footnote in a textbook, but as a cinematic, emotionally resonant experience. Picture a small group of modern wanderers, weary from a season of travel, their skin darkened by the equatorial sun, and their eyes weary from scanning the horizon for predators. They arrive at the edge of a clearing as the sun begins to set, casting a bruised orange light through the ancient teak trees. There, sitting by a fire that smells of different wood and different prey, are the others. They are the Denisovans. They are taller, perhaps, with broader chests and faces that carry the rugged geometry of the northern cold. They are the ancient ghosts, made flesh. The silence in that clearing would have been absolute, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the distant rhythmic hum of the forest insects. There was no common language to bridge the gulf of 400,000 years of separation. There was no shared history of empires or gods. There was only the primal, visceral recognition of a fellow traveler. In the eyes of the Denisovan, the modern wanderer saw a reflection that was hauntingly familiar, yet tantalizingly strange. A cousin who had taken a different path, who had endured the ice while they had endured the sun. This was the biography of the gaze, a moment where the human eye, an organ evolved to detect the slightest movement in the brush, was used to navigate the complex landscape of the soul. In the warmth of a shared campfire, the two lineages began to blur. This was not a clash of civilizations, for the concept of civilization was still tens of thousands of years in the future. It was a meeting of individuals, driven by the same fundamental needs, the need for warmth, the need for companionship, and the unspoken biological drive to ensure that the spark of life did not go out. In the quiet shelter of a cave, perhaps as a storm raged outside, the boundaries of species were forgotten. They did not just share the charred meat of a hunt or the secrets of how to knap a specific kind of flint. They shared the very blueprint of life. They shared their DNA, the silent code that had been diverging for eons, now folding back into a single braided stream. This union was a survival weapon of a different sort. When the modern wanderers arrived in the East, they were strangers in a strange land. Their immune systems were tuned to the pathogens of the African savanna, not the ancient lurking viruses of the Eurasian forests. They were not equipped for the thin air of the high plateaus or the brutal bone-chilling winters of the Siberian interior. But through these ancient unions, the Denisovan spirit was breathed into the modern line. This was the inhaled legacy, an evolutionary shortcut of staggering proportions. Instead of waiting tens of thousands of years for natural selection to slowly forge new adaptations, our ancestors borrowed the hard-won victories of the Denisovans. Consider the biography of the immune system. It is a character that lives within our blood, a silent army that remembers every war our ancestors ever fought. In those prehistoric clearings, as the two streams mingled, the Denisovans passed on specific genes, known as HLA alleles, that were perfectly calibrated to recognize the local threats of the East. This gift was a biological shield, a piece of ancestral armor that allowed the modern wanderers to survive and thrive in environments that would otherwise have claimed them. The cost of this meeting was the eventual disappearance of the Denisovans as a distinct physical entity, but the survival advantage for the hybrid children was immense. They became the children of two worlds, possessing the innovative spirit of the South and the rugged resilience of the East. As the millennia continued to turn, these hybrid populations pushed further into the unknown. Some moved toward the rising sun, crossing into the Sahul, the great landmass that once connected Australia and New Guinea. They carried the Denisovan ghost with them, tucked away in the non-coding regions of their chromosomes like a precious heirloom. In the high valleys of New Guinea, the Denisovan DNA would find a new purpose, perhaps helping the people adapt to the unique challenges of the rainforest. In the vast deserts of Australia, it would remain a silent witness to a culture that would become the oldest continuous civilization on Earth. Every heartbeat of an indigenous Australian today carries the echo of that shared campfire in the deep past, a rhythmic reminder that the ancient ghosts are still among us. The meeting of the two streams also took place in the shadows of the great mountains. As the ancestors of the Tibetans ascended the roof of the world, they too encountered the legacy of the Denisovans. This was the moment where the EPAS1 gene, the alchemy of the high altitudes, transitioned from a Denisovan trait to a human one. Imagine a mother in the high Himalayas, thousands of years ago, holding her child. Because of the union of her ancestors with the ghosts of the Altai, her blood does not thicken in the thin air. Her child breathes easily where others would gasp. This is the heritage of breath, a gift of life passed through the veil of time. The Denisovans did not vanish. They were woven into the tapestry of our own survival, ensuring that their struggle against the mountains would never be in vain. The sensory details of this weaving are rich and evocative. Imagine the texture of a hand reaching out in the dim light of a cave, one hand weathered by the frost, the other by the sun, meeting in a gesture of connection. The smell of the smoke from a fire fed by both northern pine and southern grasses. The sound of two different dialects of the human experience, attempting to find a common ground in the silence of the night. These were the moments that created us. We are not a pure species, but a magnificent complex mosaic of those who came before. The Denisovans were the ghost players in our history, the ones who stood at the edge of the world and waited for us to arrive so they could pass on the keys to the kingdom. As the ice of the Pleistocene finally began to retreat for the last time, and the world entered the long, warm embrace of the Holocene, the physical forms of the Denisovans faded into the mists of legend. Their caves were abandoned to the dust and the bats. Their tools were buried by the rising silt of the riverbeds. To the casual observer of the fossil record, it would seem as if they had simply blinked out of existence, a failed experiment in the laboratory of evolution. But deep within the marrow of the survivors, the truth remained. The Great Partition had ended in a great reunion. The two streams had become one, and the resulting river was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than either could have been alone. Generations faded into dust, and the memory of the others was lost to the storytelling of the firelight. But the biology did not forget. It carried the signature of the Altai and the memory of the Himalayas into the Neolithic Revolution, into the building of the first cities, and into the modern age. Today, when we map the human genome, we are not just looking at a list of chemicals. We are looking at a map of ancient encounters. We are seeing the silent errors and fortunate accidents that were shared between cousins in the prehistoric woods. The Denisovan ghost is not a haunting presence, but a guardian one. It is a part of our biography that speaks of connection, of the breaking of barriers, and of the incredible, messy, and beautiful way that life finds a way to persist. As the cinematic camera of our mind pans out from that ancient campfire, leaving the two groups of humans to their shared night, we realize that we are looking at the birth of the modern world. The meeting of the two streams was the moment we became truly human, not because we were better than the others, but because we were wise enough to join them. The Denisovans are not gone. They are looking out through our eyes, breathing through our lungs, and protecting us with an immune system forged in the fires of the deep past. They are the ancient ghosts who refuse to vanish, choosing instead to live on in the only way that truly matters, in the blood and the breath of their children. The silver veil of the Altai has been drawn back, and what we find behind it is not a mystery, but a mirror. We see a reflection of a people who were brave, who were resilient, and who were fundamentally just like us. They were the masters of the high places, and now they are the masters of our own genetic history. As you drift towards sleep, let the rhythm of your own heart remind you of that shared pulse in the prehistoric woods. Let your own breath be a tribute to the ancient ghosts who gave us the world. We are the river that continues to flow, a magnificent meandering stream that carries the silt and the stories of everyone who ever stood by the fire and looked toward the rising sun. The world of the late Pleistocene was a kingdom of fleeting light and encroaching shadows, a vast, shivering expanse where the heartbeat of humanity was but a faint tremor against the colossal grinding of the ice. In this era of deep time, the map of the world was written in frost and shorelines that no longer exist, a geography of land bridges and sunken continents where the ancestors of the modern world moved like whispers through a darkening theater. We find ourselves at a crossroads of existence, a moment where the physical presence of a people, the Denisovans, begins to wane, retreating into the limestone silence of the Siberian caves and the high, thin mists of the Tibetan plateaus. Yet, as their fires dimmed and their voices were swallowed by the howling winds of the mammoth steppe, something extraordinary was taking place. A union had occurred, a blending of two distinct streams of the human spirit that left behind a genetic signature, a silent sentinel that would stand watch within the very architecture of our being for 50,000 years. Imagine the biography of the genome, not as a cold sequence of chemicals, but as a living, breathing archive, a sacred library tucked away within the microscopic coils of every cell. This trait, this hidden inheritance, is a character of immense patience and profound mystery. It is a passenger that does not age, a traveler that does not tire. While the Denisovans themselves eventually faded into the long gray shadows of extinction, their DNA did not perish in the cold. It found a sanctuary within us, finding refuge in the non-coding regions and the functional segments of our ancestors' chromosomes. It was a stowaway on the greatest journey ever taken, a silent passenger on the ships of human migration that would eventually colonize every corner of the habitable Earth. This genetic signature was a survival weapon forged in a world that was vanishing, yet it carried within it the instructions for a landscape that modern humans were only just beginning to understand. The journey of this silent sentinel began in the humid emerald twilights of Southeast Asia and the rugged frontiers of the East. Picture a band of travelers 50 millennia ago, moving through a world where the sea levels were lower and the islands of Indonesia were part of a vast, connected landmass known as Sunda. These were the descendants of the Great Weaving, the children who carried the first sparks of the Denisovan ghost in their marrow. As they pushed further east, they faced a barrier that had stopped almost every other terrestrial mammal for millions of years: the Wallace Line. This was a deep-water trench, a treacherous invisible boundary where the flora and fauna of Asia abruptly ended and the strange alien world of Australasia began. To cross it was to defy the very logic of the planet. In the salt spray and the crashing surf of those ancient straits, the Denisovan inheritance was there. It was in the hands of the woman who lashed together the first primitive rafts of bamboo and vine. It was in the eyes of the man who read the stars and the flight of birds to find the distant, hazy promise of land over the horizon. As they crossed into the great southern continent of Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea, the silent sentinel traveled with them. It was a vestige of the Altai cold being carried into the tropical heat, a collection of biological memories that were now being repurposed for a new world. In these pioneers, the DNA was not a dormant relic, but an active participant in their survival. It provided the ancient accidents of immune resilience, the biological armor that allowed them to withstand the novel parasites of the rainforest and the searing ultraviolet light of the desert sun. The duality of this inheritance is a story of adaptation versus cost. To carry this ancient code was to possess a shield, but it also meant carrying the weight of a world that was gone. The DNA was a treasure map with no one to read it, a series of instructions for environmental pressures that were shifting with every passing century. For most of human history, this heritage lay dormant, a ghost in the machine of our biology that exerted its influence in the background, unnoticed and unnamed. It waited through the long, slow retreat of the glaciers. It waited as the mammoth steppe vanished and the great herds of the Pleistocene were replaced by the domesticated flocks of the Neolithic Revolution. Imagine a night 10,000 years ago, on the banks of a river in the Fertile Crescent. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and the first fermented grains. A woman sits by a hearth, her hands calloused from the labor of the first harvests. She is part of the Great Transition, the moment when humanity began to settle, to build, and to command the earth. She does not know that within her, tucked away in the deep recesses of her genetic code, is a fragment of a hunter from the Altai who lived 40,000 years before her. She does not know that her ability to survive a local fever or her body's efficiency in processing certain nutrients is a gift from a people who never saw a field of wheat or a city of stone. The silent sentinel remained at its post, watching over her as she laid the foundations of civilization, a prehistoric guardian whose watch would not end for thousands of years to come. As the centuries turned into millennia, the world grew louder and more crowded. The silent sentinel waited through the rise of the first empires, through the carving of the pyramids under the scorching Egyptian sun, and through the bloody expansions of the Silk Road. It was carried in the blood of the traders who moved through the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush, and the sailors who navigated the vast, obsidian waters of the Pacific. It was a silent witness to the birth of philosophy, the invention of the printing press, and the smoky, clanging birth of the Industrial Revolution. Throughout all these epochs, the Denisovan ghost remained invisible, a hidden architecture beneath the surface of the human form. It was a biological memory of a time when the world was wild and the ice was king, a set of survival strategies that had become part of the very definition of what it means to be us. The sensory experience of this genetic waiting is one of profound stillness. Think of the texture of the flint that was once the height of technology, now replaced by steel and silicon. Think of the smell of the wood smoke that has been the constant companion of the human story, from the caves of the Altai to the hearths of the Victorian age. The silent sentinel has felt it all, recorded in the subtle shifts and expressions of the genome. It is a character that has seen the world change from a place of mystery and spirits into a place of data and machines. Yet, the code itself remains unchanged, a pristine copy of an ancient encounter, waiting for the moment when we would finally develop the eyes to see it. That moment of sacred unveiling arrived not with a shout, but with the quiet hum of a sequencing machine in a sterile laboratory. For the first time, we developed the ability to read the treasure map. We looked into the microscopic coils of our own being and found the ancient complexity that had been hidden there for 50,000 years. We saw the silent errors that were actually masterpieces of adaptation. We realized that the ghost in the machine was not a malfunction, but a fundamental part of our design. We discovered that the Denisovans were not an extinct branch of the tree, but a living graft upon our own trunk. As we peer into this molecular mirror, we see the evolutionary journey of the human body as a grand, unfolding epic. The silent sentinel is the narrator of this story, a witness to the resilience of life in the face of impossible odds. It reminds us that we are not the masters of our own destiny, but the beneficiaries of 1,000,000 fortunate accidents and the sacrifices of those who came before us. The Denisovan DNA is a character that speaks of connection across the abyss of time, a reminder that the boundaries we draw between us and them are as thin as a strand of hair and as ephemeral as the mist on the mountain. And as the ice once again prepares its long, slow return in the cycles of the planet, the silent sentinel remains at its post. It is a vestige of a world that has ceased to exist, yet it is also a preparation for the worlds yet to come. It is the history for sleep, a rhythmic, calming assurance that even when a people fades into the shadows, their spirit, their struggle, and their biological wisdom can find a way to endure. We are the sanctuary for the Denisovan ghost. We are the ship that carries their memory into the future. Generations will continue to fade into the dust, and the monuments we build today will eventually be swallowed by the earth, just as the caves of the Altai were swallowed by the silt. But deep within the marrow, the sentinel will still be there. It will be there in the lungs of the mountain dweller, in the blood of the islander, and in the very essence of the human family. It is a story that has no end, a continuous flowing narrative of survival that began with a spark in the dark and continues with every beat of our hearts. Sleep now, in the knowledge that you are never truly alone, that you carry within you a prehistoric guardian, a silent sentinel that has watched over the world for 50,000 years and will continue to watch, long after the lights of the modern world have gone out and the silence of the deep past returns once more. In the velvet darkness of the deep past, there is a place where the earth no longer belongs to the valleys, a realm where the stone rises in jagged, defiant spires to pierce the very fabric of the heavens. This is the Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world, a vast and haunting expanse where the clouds seem close enough to touch, drifting like the ghosts of ancient oceans across a landscape of frost and silence. Here, the wind never truly stops its mourning. It howls through the mountain passes with a primordial grief, scouring the rock and carrying the thin, crystalline scent of eternal snow. To stand upon this plateau is to stand at the limit of human endurance, in an environment so beautiful and so brutal that it demands a total reimagining of what it means to be alive. In this theater of the sublime, the air is not a gift, but a scarce and precious resource, stripped of the heavy oxygen that fuels the fires of the lowlands. For most of humanity, this is a forbidden kingdom, a place where the heart falters and the blood turns to lead. Yet, for the people who call this plateau home, the mountains are not an adversary, but a cradle. They move through this thin, ethereal atmosphere with a physiological grace that is nothing short of miraculous, carrying within their very cells a secret forged in the fires of the Altai eons ago. To understand this miracle, we must look at the biography of the breath, the long and arduous history of how the human lung and the human heart learned to survive in the absence of air. In the lower world, the body exists in a state of atmospheric luxury. Every inhalation brings a surge of oxygen that the blood carries with ease, feeding the muscles and the brain with the steady confidence of a river in flood. But as our ancestors began to climb, as they left the warmth of the fertile plains and ventured into the thinning mists of the great Asian interior, the rules of biology began to change. For thousands of years, the challenge of high altitude was a wall that few could scale. In most human populations, the body's response to low oxygen is a frantic, clumsy desperation. Sensing a lack of fuel, the bone marrow begins to work overtime, flooding the veins with an excess of red blood cells. It is a survival weapon that eventually turns against its owner. The blood becomes viscous and thick, a dark sludge that strains the heart and risks the lives of mothers and their unborn children. This is mountain sickness, the price the body pays for trying to force life where the air refuses to provide it. But deep within the marrow of the Tibetan people, a different story was being written. It was not a story of struggle, but of a quiet, elegant adaptation, a legacy left behind by an ancient ghost. Long before the first permanent settlements were carved into the Himalayan stone, the Denisovans had already mastered these heights. They were the pioneers of the thin air, the first to find a way to exist in harmony with the void. In the silence of their genome, a fortunate error had occurred, a subtle shift in the code of life within a gene known as EPAS1. This was not a dry chemical change, but a masterpiece of biological engineering. It was the alchemy of the high altitudes, a silent sentinel that told the body to remain calm when the air grew thin. Instead of thickening the blood into a dangerous mire, this gene allowed the Tibetan ancestors to use what little oxygen they had with a surgical, haunting efficiency. It was a signature of survival, a gift from a cousin species that had walked the earth and vanished, leaving only this fragment of their essence to protect the future. Imagine, if you will, a day in the life of a Denisovan woman 30,000 years ago, standing on a wind-swept ridge in the Altai. She is not gasping for air. She is steady, her breathing rhythmic and slow. She carries a child on her back, wrapped in the thick, smoked hides of a mountain goat. As she climbs toward a cave where the community fire flickers like a lonely star, her heart does not race with the frantic beat of the lowland traveler. Her blood flows with the clarity of a mountain stream, perfectly tuned to the environment that surrounds her. This is the living ghost of the Denisovan, not a fossil gathering dust in a museum tray, but a functional, breathing reality that allowed her to thrive where others would perish. When the two streams of humanity eventually met and merged, this gene did not disappear into the shadows. It found a new sanctuary in the ancestors of the Tibetans, a genetic inheritance that would allow them to colonize the roof of the world and turn the forbidden heights into a homeland. The sensory world of the Tibetan plateau is one of extreme clarity and extreme sensory toll. The light here is different. It is a sharp, ultraviolet blade that cuts through the atmosphere, illuminating the world with a brilliance that can blind the unprepared. The smell is of ozone and cold stone, of parched earth, and the acrid tang of yak dung fires. In this world, the human body is a character in a drama of deep time, a vessel for a collection of survival strategies gathered from the corners of the earth. We are not a single pure lineage, but a magnificent, messy mosaic, a tapestry woven from the threads of those who came before us. The Tibetan people are the living proof of this interconnectedness. Their ability to exist in the clouds is not a cultural invention or a recent mastery of technology. It is an ancient memory carved in their DNA, a biological bridge that spans the abyss between the Paleolithic and the present. As the sun sets over the Himalayas, casting long violet shadows across the prayer flags that flutter in the morning wind, we see the true legacy of the Denisovan. It is in the steady gaze of the mountain dweller, the effortless climb of the shepherd, and the healthy birth of a child in a village 5 miles above the sea. This is the ultimate triumph of the ghost species. They did not leave behind stone monuments or vast empires, but they left behind something far more enduring. They left behind the breath of life itself. They gave us the keys to the high places, ensuring that even in the most inhospitable corners of our planet, the human story would continue to unfold. The inheritance of the Tibetan clouds is a reminder that we are never truly alone in our struggle for survival. We carry the strength of the extinct within us, their hard-won victories pulsing in our veins and echoing in every breath we take in the thin, cold air of the world's edge. The world was once a place of vast, interlocking silences, where the geography of the earth was written in the rising and falling of the tides and the slow, inexorable march of the ice. We have wandered through the frozen cathedrals of the Altai and stood upon the wind-scoured roof of the world. But now, the cinematic lens of our history shifts. We leave behind the thin, biting air of the mountains and descend into a realm of liquid light and emerald shadows. Picture, if you will, the world as it appeared 50,000 years ago, a time when the oceans had retreated into the glaciers, exposing land bridges that connected the great Asian landmass to the archipelagos of the south. This was the era of the Great Crossings, a journey into the humid, salt-sprayed heart of the tropics. Here, the biting cold of the Siberian tundra is replaced by a heavy pulsating heat, and the scent of frost is exchanged for the intoxicating perfume of damp earth, blooming orchids, and the brine of the turquoise seas. In this lush paradise, we find that the ghost of the Denisovan did not perish in the snow. It traveled across the equator, finding a new sanctuary at the very edges of the known world, in the islands of Melanesia and the vast, sun-drenched continent of Australia. To understand this journey, we must look at the biography of the immune system, that invisible internal character that serves as the body's most dedicated guardian. While the Denisovans in the north were forging shields against the cold, their kin who moved southward were engaged in a different kind of biological alchemy. For the pioneers who first navigated the treacherous waters of the Wallace Line, the environment was not a sculptor of lungs, but a sculptor of the blood. In the rainforests of New Guinea and the coastal fringes of the Sahel, the air is thick not only with moisture, but with unseen life, pathogens, parasites, and ancient tropical fevers that had never been encountered in the dry, sterile air of the north. For a modern human traveler, these forests are a minefield of biological threats. But for the ancestors of the indigenous Australians and the Melanesian peoples, the ghost species had already provided the armor. This inheritance took the form of a complex series of silent errors in the code of life, specifically in the human leukocyte antigen system, the HLA genes that act as the sentinels of our cellular gates. These were the genetic gifts of the Denisovans, varied and diverse, adapting to the needs of the children who carried them. In the silence of the genome, these segments of DNA were like ancient, encrypted maps, containing the memory of every battle fought by a Denisovan ancestor against the microscopic invaders of the East. When the two streams of humanity mingled in the forests of Wallacea, this biological wisdom was shared. It was a transfer of armor, a passing of the shield from a lineage that had mastered the local ecology to one that was just beginning its long walk into the southern sun. Imagine a day in the life of a hunter, 50 millennia ago, on the coast of what is now the Kimberley. The heat is a physical weight, a shimmering haze that rises from the red sand. He moves through the spinifex with a quiet, rhythmic grace, his skin dark as the volcanic stone, his eyes scanning the horizon for the slightest movement. He is one of the first to set foot on this continent, a pioneer of the deep time. Inside him, the Denisovan ghost is a silent partner in his survival. As he drinks from a hidden rock pool, his immune system, reinforced by the ancient DNA, immediately identifies and neutralizes the pathogens lurking in the water. As he tracks a kangaroo through the sweltering noon, his body regulates its internal furnace with a subtle, efficient precision, a trait perhaps honed by the Denisovans' own history of managing extreme temperatures, though here it is used to shed heat rather than preserve it. This is the duality of the trait, a survival weapon that allows him to inhabit a landscape of fire, born from ancestors who once inhabited a landscape of ice. The cost of this adaptation was an irrevocable commitment to this new world. To carry these genes was to be biologically tethered to the unique ecology of the Sahul. As the centuries turned into millennia and the sea levels rose, cutting off the continent from the rest of the world, these people became the guardians of the oldest continuous cultures on our planet. The Denisovan legacy was not a fossilized memory, but a living, breathing component of their social and spiritual existence. In the rhythmic drumming of a coastal ceremony, where the beat of the wood on stone echoes the heartbeat of the earth, the ancient ghost is present. It is in the song lines that map the desert, in the deep ancestral connection to the land that defines the indigenous Australian experience. The reach of the Altai was far wider than we ever dared to dream. A sliver of Siberian bone finds its echo in the ochre-painted chests of men dancing on the shores of the Arafura Sea. As we peer through the genetic mist, we see that the Denisovans were not a monolith, but a diverse and far-reaching people. The variant of DNA found in the Pacific is distinct from that found in the mountains of Tibet, suggesting that different tribes of ghosts encountered our ancestors at different points in their long migration. Some were the masters of the mountains, others the masters of the island seas. In Papua New Guinea, the Denisovan inheritance is particularly profound, making up nearly 5% of the modern genome, a staggering biological legacy. Here, the biography of the body reveals a people perfectly tuned to the vertical jungles and the humid valleys. The ghost is not a haunting, but a homecoming. Think of the texture of the first outrigger canoes, carved from the massive trunks of tropical hardwoods, as they crested the swells of the deep water trenches. The salt air stings the eyes, and the fear of the open ocean is a cold knot in the stomach. But the pioneers pressed on, fueled by a curiosity that is the hallmark of our shared human soul. In those moments of crossing, the Denisovan DNA was a quiet, internal passenger, a vestige of a world that had ceased to exist, yet providing the very resilience needed to find a new one. It is a story of profound connection across the abyss of time and geography. The guardians of the island seas remind us that we are a mosaic of survival strategies, a collection of ancestral whispers that guide us through the darkness and the heat. Generations faded into the red dust of the outback and the deep silt of the rainforest floor. The Denisovans as a physical people vanished, their stories perhaps becoming the first myths of the dream time, or the first legends of the spirits that dwell in the deep woods. But their biological wisdom remained, a silent sentinel that waited through the rise of the first agriculturalists in the north and the first voyagers in the east. It survived the isolation of the continent, the shifting of the winds, and the eventual arrival of the modern world. Today, when we look at the genetics of the Pacific, we are not just looking at a map of ancestry, we are looking at a record of human bravery. We are seeing the result of a union that occurred in the shadows of a prehistoric wood, a meeting that ensured that the Denisovan spirit would never truly vanish as long as there are people to walk the red earth or sail the turquoise seas. The sensory details of this southern legacy are as vivid as the northern ones were stark. Instead of the crunch of snow, we have the soft, sibilant hiss of sand through the fingers. Instead of the smell of larch wood, we have the pungent, medicinal scent of eucalyptus and the heavy, sweet rot of the jungle floor. The biography of the body in this realm is one of endurance against the light and the damp. The skin, as a character, has its own memories of the sun, its pigmentation a masterpiece of protective architecture. The sweat glands, too, are part of this ancient story, working in a rhythmic dance with the heat to keep the fire of the cells from burning too brightly. Every aspect of the physical form in these regions is a testament to the ancient accidents that rewrote our destiny in the tropics. As the cinematic camera of our mind pans back from the coast of Australia, leaving the campfires of the oldest cultures to burn under the Southern Cross, we realize that the Denisovans are not a mystery to be solved, but a lineage to be honored. They were the pioneers of the East, from the highest peaks to the deepest oceans. They are the silent partners in our survival, their genetic gifts a biological armor that has protected us for 50,000 years. In the silence of the bush or the roar of the surf, the ancient ghost is there, proving that our story is one of incredible interlocking pieces. We are the inheritors of the Altai and the guardians of the island seas, a single magnificent tapestry of life that continues to unfurl across the eons. And as the night deepens and the world falls into a rhythmic ancestral sleep, the code remains patient. It is a treasure map that we have only just begun to read, a collection of instructions for a world that is always changing. The Denisovan ghost is a reminder that we are never alone, that we carry within us the strength of those who face the unknown with nothing but their flint, their fire, and their unbreakable will to persist. Sleep now, in the knowledge that your own biology is a cathedral of such histories, a sacred vessel for the ghosts who loved, struggled, and survived, so that you might breathe the salt air and see the rising sun. In the deep velvet stillness of the Pleistocene night, the world was a cathedral of shadows, where the boundaries between the living and the earth were as thin as a thread of silk. We find ourselves drifting through a landscape of haunting silence, where the moon casts a cold silver light over the vast mammoth steppes and the jagged limestone spires of the Altai. This was a world of immense echoing distances, a time when the great ice sheets acted as the silent librarians of history, locking away the secrets of the past in a grip of permafrost and stone. Yet, as we peer into the darkness, searching for the physical presence of those who once walked these ridges, we are met with a profound and evocative void. We have found the sturdy, heavy-browed skulls of the Neanderthals in the damp caves of Europe. We have unearthed the delicate, sun-bleached remains of our own ancestors in the red earth of the Great Rift Valley. But the Denisovans, the masters of the High East, remain a people of the mind, a ghost species that has achieved a kind of poetic immortality by vanishing almost entirely from the physical realm. Consider the biography of the bone, that hard, calcified archive that usually serves as the final testament of a lineage. Bone is the anchor of archaeology, the dense, mineralized memory that survives the rot and the wind to tell us the story of a life. It tells us of the strength of a hunter's grip, the nutritional struggles of a harsh winter, and the slow, agonizing wear of the years. But in the story of the Denisovans, the bone is a character that has chosen to remain in the shadows. If their DNA is so prevalent, weaving its way through the blood of millions in the modern world, why is it that we have so few physical fragments to hold? The mystery of their absence is a deep-time riddle, a silence so heavy it feels like a physical weight upon the chest of science. We possess thousands of Neanderthal fossils, documented with an intimacy that allows us to reconstruct their very gait and the timbre of their voices. Yet the Denisovans are known to us almost entirely through the silent errors in the code of life, a legacy built not of granite or calcium, but of protein and nucleotide. This absence is not a failure of the earth to preserve, but perhaps a final poetic statement by the people themselves. They were the ultimate nomads of deep time, a lineage that walked across the world and then stepped quietly into the void, leaving no great monuments, no stone cities, and no vast, ceremonial graveyards to mark their passing. Theirs was a world written in water and air, a transient existence that prioritized the survival of the offspring over the permanence of the monument. We must imagine the day in the life of a Denisovan trekker, moving through the high plateaus of Tibet or the dense, humid forests of Southeast Asia. She does not build a temple to her gods. She carves her spirit into the tools she carries and the children she protects. When she dies, her body is returned to the mountain or the forest, her minerals dissolving back into the earth, leaving only the phantom ship of her genome to carry her essence forward into the future. What little we do possess are nothing more than tiny, precious anchors holding a vast ship of human experience to the shore of the present. A single jawbone from the Baishia Karst cave perched high above the clouds on the Tibetan plateau. A few massive, complex teeth found in the freezing dust of the Altai, a fragment of a skull that hints at a robust and formidable architecture. These are the physical echoes of a population that once spanned an entire continent, from the Siberian tundra to the tropical fringes of the Pacific. These fragments did not speak to us in the morphology of the face, but in the molecular language of the sequences they contained. They revealed a people whose teeth were built for a different world, large, powerful grinders meant to process the tough, gritty flora of the Pleistocene or the high-fat diet of the mammoth hunters. The duality of these remains is a story of incredible physical power matched by a haunting skeletal scarcity. As we look at the biography of the tooth, we see a character defined by the necessity of consumption and the resistance of decay. A tooth is the hardest substance in the human body, a crystalline fortress that guards the secrets of an individual's diet and environment. The Denisovan teeth were masterpieces of evolutionary design, possessing a complexity and a scale that distinguished them from both Neanderthals and modern humans. They are the artifacts of a people who had to chew through the raw, frozen reality of the East, their enamel thick as the winter ice. Yet, even these fortresses eventually fell to the slow, patient erosion of time. The fact that we have so few of them is a reminder of how precarious the thread of history truly is. Much of our own story is like smoke in the wind, existing for a brief, brilliant moment before being swallowed by the vastness of the eons. The disappearance of the Denisovan physical form is a cinematic vanishing act that challenges our understanding of legacy. We are a species obsessed with the permanent, with the carving of names in stone and the building of structures meant to defy the centuries. But the Denisovans represent a different path. They remind us that the most enduring legacy is not one that can be touched, but one that is breathed. They are a reminder that the majority of human history was lived by people who left no trace other than the survival of those who came after. They lived, they laughed, they felt the fear of the dark and the warmth of the first fire. Yet their joys and their terrors are now accessible only through the genetic mist. We are left to wonder about the shape of their brows, the color of their eyes, and the gods they whispered to in the silence of the Altai night. Think of a night 30,000 years ago, in a valley where the glaciers were beginning their slow, final retreat. A group of Denisovans sits around a hearth, the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat filling the cool air. There is a sense of community, a shared culture that likely included music, storytelling, and complex social bonds. In the flickering light, a grandfather tells the younger generation of the Great Partition, of the time when their ancestors first turned toward the rising sun. He does not know that in 30 millennia, his entire culture will be reduced to a silent sentinel in the DNA of a distant world. He only knows the warmth of the fire and the weight of the child sleeping in his arms. This is the biography of the moment, the fleeting, precious reality of human existence that is so often lost to the grand narratives of evolution. The transition from a physical presence to a genetic ghost is a slow, elegant descent into the strata of time. As the Denisovan populations dwindled, perhaps absorbed by the rising tide of Homo sapiens or thinned by the changing climate, their physical remains became increasingly rare. The earth, which had once been their kingdom, became their tomb, but a tomb without markers. The silence of their graveyards is not a sign of a lack of respect for the dead, but perhaps a reflection of a world view that saw the body as a temporary vessel, a gift to be returned to the cycle of the earth. In this way, they are the most successful of all humans, for they have survived not as statues, but as a living, functioning part of the modern world. Science, in its quest to reconstruct the past, has had to develop new eyes to see the Denisovans. We have moved beyond the shovel and the brush to the sequencing machine and the bioinformatic algorithm. This is the sacred unveiling of the molecular age. We are learning to listen to the whispers in the genetic code, reconstructing a people from the protein and nucleotide they left behind. We can see their migrations in the distribution of their DNA across the Pacific. We can see their adaptations in the lungs of the Tibetans. They are a people known entirely through their impact on us, a mirror that reflects our own complex and braided history. This absence of bone makes them more poetic, a reminder that we are the living archives of every ghost who ever walked the earth. As we wander through the empty caves of the Altai, where the wind still carries the scent of frost and the memory of the mammoths, we can almost feel the weight of their absence. The cave is a hollow eye, a witness to a time when the world was shared by different kinds of humans. The Denisovans were the masters of this East, the pioneers who mastered the cold and the heights, yet they left us with nothing to hold but our own hands. And as you drift toward sleep, let the rhythm of your own heart be a tribute to their vanishing. You are the monument they built. You are the stone city they never needed to carve. Their legacy is in your blood, in the way you breathe the mountain air, and in the ancient accidents that allow you to survive. They did not leave the world. They simply changed their state, moving from the physical to the ethereal, from the bone to the breath. Generations will continue to fade into the dust, and one day our own monuments will crumble into the sand and the silt. But the story of the Denisovans teaches us that nothing is truly lost. The silent sentinel will continue to stand watch, the fortunate mistakes will continue to protect, and the ghost species will continue to live on in the only way that truly matters. We are the ultimate nomads, traveling through time in the vessels of our children, leaving behind a history that is written in the very code of life. Sleep now, in the quiet knowledge that you carry a world of ghosts within you, and that their vanishing was not an end, but a magnificent poetic transformation into the very essence of who you are. In the quiet, sterile sanctuaries of the 21st century, temples of glass, steel, and silicon, a sacred unveiling began, one that would reach back through the corridors of eons to touch the very face of our origins. To understand this moment, we must first picture the world as it was held in the grip of the Pleistocene, a world of vast, blue-shadowed glaciers and the rhythmic, thundering migration of millions of hooves across the mammoth steppe. In that deep time, the earth was a place of immense, echoing distances, where a single fire in the dark was a small, defiant sun against the encroaching cold. For hundreds of millennia, the stories of those who sat by those fires were lost, buried beneath layers of limestone dust and the slow, patient accumulation of the Earth's crust. We had long told ourselves a simple story, a lonely, linear path of ascent, where one species stood upon the shoulders of the last, climbing a ladder toward the light. But as the first ancient instructions were drawn from the silence of the Altai, That latter began to dissolve, replaced by a vibrant, shimmering web of interconnected lives. The biography of the genome is perhaps the most elegant character in this epic, a long-hidden script that acts as a living archive of every encounter, every struggle, and every union our ancestors ever experienced. For 50,000 years, this character remained dormant, hidden within the microscopic coils of our own cells, waiting for a time when we would develop the eyes to see it. That time arrived with the precision of a jeweler's loupe. In the laboratories of the modern age, the air is not thick with wood smoke, but clean and filtered, yet the gravity of the work feels as ancient as the bone fragments themselves. Scientists, acting as the high priests of memory, learned the delicate art of extracting the blueprints of life from the most unlikely of places, the fine gray silt of a cave floor and the dense, crystalline enamel of a molar. A tooth is not just a tool for sustenance. It is a fortress of calcium that guards the most precious treasure of the deep past, the code that dictates how a heart beats and how a lung draws breath. As these ancient sequences were unspooled, the scientific world felt the foundations of its own history begin to shift. We had expected to find a footnote, a minor variation on a familiar theme. Instead, we found a world that was crowded and teeming with different ways of being human. The Denisovans, we realized, were not a single, monolithic group, but a complex tapestry of populations, some as distinct from one another as we are from the Neanderthals. Imagine the duality of adaptation at work here. In the north, a branch of this ghost lineage was honing its resilience against the frost, while in the south, their kin were adapting to the humid, pathogen-rich environments of the tropical islands. Each group carried a specific set of fortunate mistakes, silent errors in the code of life that acted as survival weapons against their respective landscapes. The cost of this divergence was a deepening of the genetic distance between them, yet the reward was a mastery of the most diverse corners of the planet. In this newly unveiled world, we must picture the reality of the prehistoric encounter. Imagine a twilight 40,000 years ago in the foothills of the Himalayas. A small band of modern wanderers, recently arrived from the warmth of the south, pauses at a mountain stream. Across the water, they see a group of others, the Denisovans of the High East. There is no language to bridge the divide, yet there is the shared texture of flint, the shared smell of wood smoke, and the mutual fear of the predator prowling the tall grass. This was not a world of inevitable conflict, but of a quiet, primal recognition. We see now that these different kinds of humans coexisted, traded, and loved. They did not just share a horizon, they shared the very essence of their biology. The biography of the body tells us that our own success was not born of a singular lonely superiority. It was born of our ability to absorb the strengths of others, to fold the hard-won victories of the ghost species into the fabric of our own survival. Consider the fortunate accident of our immune systems. When our ancestors moved into the vast expanses of Eurasia, they were strangers to the local diseases. They were vulnerable, their biological armor full of gaps. But through their unions with the Denisovans, they inherited the HLA genes, the gatekeepers of our cells, that had been refined through hundreds of thousands of years of exposure to the eastern forests. This was a sacred unveiling of a different sort, a realization that we are a patchwork of lost worlds. We carry within us the lung of the mountain dweller and the blood of the ice hunter. We are the vessels for their memory, the living archives of an ancient struggle that did not end in extinction, but in integration. The Denisovan story is the story of our own interconnectedness, a reminder that the human spirit is a river fed by many streams. As the genetic map was drawn with increasing clarity, we saw the ghost species stepping fully out of the shadows. They were no longer a curious anomaly found in a single Siberian cave. They were a central protagonist in the epic of how we came to be. From the high plateaus of Tibet to the tropical shores of Papua New Guinea, their legacy is a functional, breathing reality. The biography of the breath in the high-altitude dweller is a direct descendant of a Denisovan fire lit in the Altai eons ago. We must treat these genetic fragments not as dry data points, but as the echoes of real lives lived with intensity and grace. Each segment of their DNA in our genome is a character with its own history of survival and sacrifice. It is the crunch of snow under a hunter's foot, the warmth of a mother's hand in a cold cave, and the fear of the dark night that preceded the first dawn of civilization. Generations faded into the dust of the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, and the Industrial Era, yet the code remained patient. It waited through the building of the Great Wall and the rise of the digital age, a silent sentinel watching over us from within. The sacred unveiling of the 21st century has allowed us to finally acknowledge our debt to the others. We are not a pure, isolated lineage. We are a magnificent, complex mosaic. As the ice of the deep past continues to melt under the scrutiny of modern science, we find that the more we learn about the Denisovans, the more we learn about the hidden depths of ourselves. We are the survivors who carry the ghosts of the Altai in our very marrow, proving that in the long, slow rhythm of evolution, no one is ever truly lost, as long as their breath continues to flow through the lungs of their children. The cinematic camera of our mind now pans out from the sterile laboratories, moving across the vast, dark landscapes of the past and the present. We see the lights of the modern world reflecting off the same mountain peaks that the Denisovans once called home. The sacred unveiling has shown us that our origin is not a single point on a map, but a global symphony of encounters. We are the inheritors of the cold and the masters of the heights, and as you drift towards sleep, let the steady rhythm of your own heart be a tribute to that ancient shared pulse. You are a sanctuary for the ghosts, a living monument to a world of humans who walked the earth long before the first word was ever written. The fire is low now, reduced to a pulsing crimson heart of embers that glows against the encroaching velvet of the prehistoric night. In this soft, flickering dimness, the world of the 21st century feels impossibly distant, a fleeting dream of steel and glass that has not yet been imagined. Instead, we are here, at the bedtime of the human story, seated on the cold, honest earth of the Paleolithic. The air carries the sharp, resinous perfume of burning cedar and the distant metallic scent of snow drifting down from the Altai peaks. We must reflect, in this sacred stillness, on what it truly means to carry a ghost within us. For too long, we viewed ourselves as the sole survivors of a lonely tragedy, the last of our kind standing on a deserted stage. But the Denisovans have returned from the mists to remind us that we are never truly alone, and that the past is never truly gone. It is not buried beneath us. It is breathing inside us. They are a haunting, beautiful reminder of the immense scale of time and the fragile, shimmering thread of chance that allowed your particular life to flicker into existence tonight. Imagine the biography of the heartbeat, not as a simple mechanical thrum, but as a continuous, unbroken rhythm passed from hand to hand across the abyss of the Pleistocene. To reach this moment, to breathe the air of this very second, thousands of generations had to survive the impossible. Millions of hearts had to find their rhythm in the face of the cave lion's roar, the biting famine of the volcanic winter, and the crushing weight of the advancing glaciers. Each of those heartbeats was a victory, a defiant pulse against the silence of extinction. And the Denisovans are a fundamental part of that rhythm. They are the silent percussion in the background of our own song. When you feel the sting of a cold wind on your cheek, or find yourself standing in the cathedral-like quiet of a high, ancient forest, you are not merely observing nature. You are experiencing a sensory world that they knew intimately. Your body remembers the chill because they survived it. Your blood understands the thin air because they mastered it. Consider the duality of the memory, the way a trait can be both a vestige of a vanished world and a tool for a modern one. We carry their ancient struggle in the very architecture of our being. This is the biography of the bone, the hard, calcified witness to our journey. If you were to peer into the microscopic lattices of your own marrow, you would find the silent errors and fortunate accidents that rewrote our destiny. Perhaps it was a night 80,000 years ago, in a cave shelter much like this one, where a Denisovan mother cradled a child who carried a new mutation, a subtle shift in the code that allowed for a stronger immune response or a more efficient way to process the fats of a mammoth hunt. In that moment, she did not know she was protecting the future of a different kind of human. She only knew the warmth of the child's skin and the fear of the shadows dancing on the wall. Her survival was the sacrifice that paved the way for your own. She is the ancient memory carved in your bone, the silent witness to a journey that has spanned the rise and fall of ice ages and empires. In the stillness of the night, when the sounds of the modern world fall away, we can almost hear their footsteps echoing in the corridors of our DNA. It is a soft, persistent beat, a molecular percussion that resonates through 50,000 years of history. It is a voice that does not speak in words, but in the language of sequences, whispering a truth that shatters our illusions of purity and isolation. We were here, the code says. We endured the frost that turned the blood to ice. We crossed the land bridges that have long since drowned beneath the turquoise seas. We looked at the same moon you see tonight and felt the same ache of wonder. This is the realization of our own interconnectedness, the understanding that we are a patchwork of lost worlds, a living mosaic of everyone who ever stood by the fire and refused to let the light go out. The Denisovan legacy is a biography of connection. It challenges the dry textbook definitions of species and invites us into a more poetic understanding of our origins. We are not a single lonely vine, but a braided river. Think of the day in the life of the first hybrid children, the ones who stood as the physical bridge between the modern wanderer and the ancient ghost. In their bodies, the silent sentinel was first posted. They were the ones who had to navigate a world where two different histories were merging into one. When they reached for a piece of fruit or ran from a predator, they were using a body that was a revolutionary experiment in human resilience. They carried the innovative spirit of the African savanna and the rugged, cold-forged strength of the Siberian heights. They were the first to carry the treasure map of the genome, a map that would eventually lead us to the realization that them has always been us. As the embers of our campfire turn to gray ash, we find a deep, meditative comfort in this ancient companionship. The scale of deep time is no longer a source of vertigo, but a source of grounding. We are the inheritors of a magnificent, messy, and beautiful endurance. The history for sleep is the story of how we were never meant to be alone. The Denisovans remind us that every breath we take is a collaborative effort, a gift from cousins who stepped into the void so that we might walk in the light. They are the phantom ship that finally found a harbor in our own blood. In the quiet of the high places, in the rhythm of a coastal tide, and in the very pulse of your wrist, the ghost is there. It is a soft beat that says, with the authority of the eons, we endured. We are you. The world of the Denisovans was one of sensory extremes that have left a permanent mark on our biology. Imagine the biography of the eye as it adapted to the blinding glare of the Pleistocene snowfields. The squint of a hunter 30 millennia ago, trying to discern the shape of a white fox against a white horizon, is a memory that survives in the way your own pupils dilate in the dark. The biography of the skin, remembers the first time the sun of the south met the frost of the north, creating a new palette of human tones. These are not merely biological facts, they are the artifacts of a shared existence. We are the living archives of the Paleolithic. Every time you shiver, or every time you gasp in the thin air of a mountain pass, you are touching the hem of their world. You are participating in a conversation that began before the first pyramid was ever built, a dialogue between the living and the ghosts that defines the very essence of the human condition. As we prepare to transition into the final silence, we must honor the ancient accidents that made us. Evolution is often described as a harsh mistress, a relentless force of culling and competition. But the Denisovan story offers a gentler narrative, one of absorption and integration. It suggests that our greatest strength was not our ability to outcompete, but our capacity to join. We are a sacred patchwork. In the silence of the night, this realization acts as a lullaby, a rhythmic assurance that we belong to a lineage that is vast, ancient, and profoundly resilient. The footsteps in the DNA are not a haunting, they are a homecoming. They tell us that no matter how much the world changes, the fundamental pulse of our survival remains the same. The dying embers now cast only a faint, pulsing light, barely reaching the edges of the cave. The world outside is vast and cold, but inside the sanctuary of our own biology, the fire still burns. The Denisovans are the guardians of the hearth within our cells. They are the ones who stayed in the East, who mastered the impossible, and who chose to live on through us. Their survival was a sacrifice of form for the sake of essence. They let their physical bones crumble into the dust of the Altai so that their genetic wisdom could sail forward into the 21st century. As you close your eyes, let the biography of the body take over. Feel the steady, slow endurance of your own heart, a rhythm that has been tuned by 50,000 years of encounters. You are the bedtime of the human story, the place where all the wandering and all the ghosts finally come to rest. Sleep now, in the knowledge that you are a vessel for a world of memories. You are the master of the high places and the guardian of the island seas. You are the product of 1,000 fires and 1,000,000 heartbeats. The Denisovan ghost is not a stranger. It is the part of you that knows how to survive the cold. It is the part of you that knows how to breathe the thin air. It is the part of you that is connected to the very first spark of human curiosity. In the deep, quiet dark, the silent sentinel remains at its post, a prehistoric guardian ensuring that the story never truly ends. We were here. We endured. We are you. The great cycles of the earth have turned once more, bringing us to the velvet edge of our journey, where the silver light of the moon spills over the jagged, frozen cathedrals of the Altai Mountains. We stand at the end of a long and winding road through the deep time of the Pleistocene, a path illuminated not by the harsh sun of the modern world, but by the flickering amber warmth of prehistoric fires. The mystery of the Denisovans, those masters of the eastern twilight, is no longer a dry puzzle to be solved by the cold instruments of science, but a story to be felt in the very marrow of our bones. They have emerged from the genetic mist not as strangers, but as the ghost species living inside us, a biological legacy that continues to shape our health, our resilience, and our profound elemental connection to the earth. As you drift toward the soft shores of sleep, imagine for a moment the vastness of the history you carry within the microscopic coils of your own cells. You are not a solitary traveler in time. You are a masterpiece of evolutionary design, a living tapestry that incorporates the ancient wisdom of the mountains and the rugged strength of the island seas. The Denisovans have not disappeared into the hollow silence of extinction. They have simply changed their form, finding a quiet, enduring immortality in the breath and blood of their descendants. To understand this legacy, we must look at the biography of the breath, that rhythmic, invisible character that connects us to the first gasp of life in the Altai Caves. For a Denisovan ancestor 50,000 years ago, the breath was a hard-won victory. In the thin, biting air of the high plateaus, the lungs had to learn a language of efficiency that our lowland kin could never fathom. This trait, forged in the fires of necessity, was a survival weapon of the highest order. But it carried a cost, a commitment to the cold, a biological tether to the high places. Today, when a child is born on the roof of the world, breathing with a natural ease that defies the altitude, the Denisovan ghost is there. It is not a fossil in a museum. It is a functional, breathing reality. The lungs have a memory, a history of struggle and adaptation that has been passed down through the silent errors in the code of life, ensuring that the ancient fire lit 500,000 years ago continues to burn in the hearts of millions. Consider the biography of the blood, that red river that flows through your veins, carrying the oxygen and the immunity of 1,000 generations. Inside this river, the Denisovan legacy acts as a silent sentinel. When your body recognizes a threat, a virus that evolved in a rainforest eon ago, or a parasite that thrived in the damp of the Asian interior, it is using a biological armor that was borrowed during the great meeting of the two streams. This is the duality of our existence. We are modern wanderers, yet we carry the ancient shield of the ghosts. This inheritance is a character of immense patience, a passenger that traveled across the land bridges of Sahul and survived the rising of the seas. It is a story of survival versus vulnerability, an ancient accident that rewritten our destiny, allowing us to colonize the furthest reaches of the planet because we were wise enough to absorb the strengths of those who came before us. As the night deepens, let us imagine a day in the life of a Denisovan trekker one last time. He is moving across the mammoth steppe, his feet crunching on the permafrost, the smell of wood smoke from a distant hearth guiding him home. Every step he takes is a testament to the skeletal density and the muscular resilience of his people. He feels the cold wind on his face, a wind that carries no name, only the scent of the glacier. He is a master of this world, yet he is also a participant in a grand, unfolding drama he cannot fully perceive. He does not know that his specific way of seeing the world, his specific way of regulating his body's heat, will one day be the inheritance of a world of cities and satellites. His life is a sacrifice of the physical for the sake of the essential. When he passes his code to his children, he is ensuring that his spirit will never truly be swallowed by the grinding of the glaciers. He is finding immortality not in stone, but in the phantom ship of his genome. The Altai remains as it always has been, a place of silver peaks and deep limestone silences. Its caves still hold the dust of the ages, the discarded flakes of flint, and the microscopic signatures of skin and hair. But the silence in those caves is no longer empty. It is filled with the knowledge of our shared heritage, a resonant hum that vibrates through 50,000 years of human history. We are the vessels for their memory, the living archives of their ancient struggle. The texture of your own skin, the strength of your own grip, and the rhythm of your own heartbeat are all influenced by the fortunate mistakes made in the silence of the genome. You are a sacred patchwork, a collection of survival strategies gathered from the corners of the earth, from the Great Rift Valley to the Altai Heights, from the forests of Southeast Asia to the island seas. As you settle further into the stillness, think of the millions of heartbeats that had to find their rhythm just so you could exist in this moment. The Denisovans are a part of that rhythm, a soft, persistent beat that echoes in the corridors of your DNA. They are the silent witnesses to our journey, the ones who face the biting cold so that we might one day enjoy the warmth of a modern hearth. The past is never truly gone. It is a character in our current biography, a ghost in the machine that provides us with the resilience to face the unknowns of our own era. When you feel the quiet of a high forest or the vastness of a moonlit night, you are touching the same world they knew. Their survival was the bridge that allowed the human story to span the continents and the centuries. The biography of the body is the ultimate documentary, a film that has been running for 500,000 years, with no cuts and no pauses. In the final scene of this chapter, we see the transition from the ancient ghost to the modern human. It is a transition of grace and integration. The Denisovans did not fail in the race of evolution. They succeeded by becoming us. They gave us the keys to the kingdom, the biological tools to survive the mountains, the islands, and the ice. As the cinematic camera pans back from the Altai, leaving the peaks to the silver light of the moon, we see the world as a single, interconnected tapestry of life. There are no others, only cousins who met in the dark and shared the most precious gift of all, the blueprint of life. Sleep now, in the profound and sacred knowledge that you are the living legacy of a ghost. You carry within you the ancient fire that has burned since the dawn of the human spirit. You are the master of the high places and the guardian of the island seas. Your breath is the breath of the Altai. Your blood is the blood of the pioneers. The mystery is no longer a secret, but a shared truth that binds us all together across the abyss of time. The silence of the night is not a void, but a sanctuary filled with the whispers of those who came before. You are never alone. You are the product of eons of love, struggle, and survival. As the embers of the day fade into the darkness, let the history for sleep be your lullaby, a rhythmic assurance that you are a vital part of a story that will never truly end.